Thanks to our Patreon members for helping to make this episode possible, and we're now available on all the major podcasting platforms. You can find more information at the links below. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the conclusion of reading Plato's Symposium. And we've been on this great adventure. I really appreciate you joining me for this because it is a pleasure to spend the time just reading slowly through these great works. And the members of Patreon, the people who follow me on YouTube, really help make that possible. So I appreciate everyone who's been involved with this and asked questions and left comments and so on and so forth. So thank you very much. I appreciate that. Hope you're enjoying the ride. And again, I certainly am. And you know, we've seen the impact of Plato's thought. So it's not just what Plato said, it's that when Western philosophy for the last 2,000 years has asked questions about what is the nature of truth, which is the question of ontology, it tends to be framed in the backdrop of Plato. So even if they don't invoke Plato, the whole structure of asking the question is within the Platonic framework. When philosophers try to explore aesthetics, then again, it tends to be within the terms of Plato. When truth, beauty, love, like all the subjects that we went through, not to repeat all of them, but you get the notion, again, it's not that it's what Plato said, mind-body split. It's that the questions are asked within the context of Platonic thought. So even when no one is referencing Plato or bringing him up or knowingly invoking him in any way, their thought patterns are pre-framed in such a way that they already are thinking platonically, and hence the answers that they give will be shaped and informed by the Platonic modes of thought. And so this just incredibly pervasive presence of this kind of outlook that's been passed down, just how we talked about, is what I find so phenomenal and so unlikely. I mean, it's so extraordinarily unlikely that of all the texts, these should be the ones that are saved and translated and copied and recopied and become so massively influential. Again, don't want to give short shrift here to Aristotle, but Aristotle's influence, while huge and important, again, don't want to reduce that. It's really, even Aristotle was reinterpreted within a Platonic framework. So even Aristotelian ideas, often which are in complete disagreement with Plato's approach, tends to come down to us from this more metaphysical. And it's given much of Western thought this this powerfully metaphysical bent because Plato was functionally a metaphysician in many of his important ideas. So that's one of the key things that we've been exploring. And for me, another element of this, and why I always think it's important to go back and read the actual texts, is it exposes, or at least hopefully exposes, those elements of our thinking that have been framed from the past without us knowing it. And that, to me, is one of the great powers of philosophical thought, is we think we're thinking well, we feel like we're thinking well, we may be following the rules of thinking, but just the way that we frame our questions, the way we frame the kind of answers we're looking for. A great example, this is from a totally different field, is I can't remember the author who was talking about this, but they said if you ask a question like, how do we solve global warming, and your mind frame is within 2 years or 4 years, well, this is hard and costly and all this. If your time frame was 100 years, it would be a piece of cake. This is no problem, right? If your time frame is 1,000 years, it's like not even something to be worried about, right? So time horizon, like just when you ask questions, people say, oh, I want to get rich. Okay. The classic way is compounding interest, and so you just put a little aside, and by the time you're 187, you'll have several $1 million, and congratulations. And people are like, no, that's not how. Let's back this up again. Like, oh wait, whoa, what? Like that would be outside the mortality window of the human. So I'd like to be richer sooner than that. And it's like, oh, well, that's much different. That's a much harder question, right? The other one's a very easy question. This is a much harder question. And so that we rarely think about that how questions are framed and what answers are allowed is powerfully influential on how we think about things. But what happens is we rarely think about framing questions. For instance, I actually did this as a short philosophical fireside chat short story where there's a famous parable in the Bible where it says, the lord of the manor, the master gives 3 of his slaves, 5 talents or something, and comes back a couple of years later and says, okay, what did you do with my talents? And it's this whole parable of using your talents and investing money and, blah, blah, blah. And the one guy just gives back the money and says, well, I didn't want to lose it, so I buried it, and so here you go. And he says, I'm going to throw you out and you're going to suffer and all this. And there's all these takes and interpretations of this. It's a very famous biblical passage. But the question that rarely seems to come up is the framing question. Is what it does is it frames you, who is, the sort of servant, as a slave. It's like, look, I don't want to take anything from this parable except for I don't want to be a slave. Like the parable should be take the money the master gave you and run for it because you're a slave and now you've got cash, right? That's the parable. But this is never how the parable is interpreted, because what happens is people go, oh, I will accept the framing of the way the world is presented to me, and then I'll try to respond within the range of questions that are considered appropriate. This is why if you've listened to my lectures over time, I fundamentally loathe multiple choice questions. I think they should absolutely not be allowed in education at any level for any purpose. And this is one of the reasons. Not only is your question framed, right? Okay, you get a question, but it has to be very narrowcast, the question itself, so that one of these A, B, C, D can be the correct response. And so both the question is narrowcast, you cannot question the question, and the answer is narrowcast, and it's very specific. And so what this does is it completely it disables the student. It keeps them from being able to think about, or if a question is asked something like, what are the largest rivers? What are the 3 largest rivers in North America? And, if it's a multiple choice question, you might say, oh, these rivers, these rivers, these rivers, these rivers. But somebody who knows a lot about rivers might be something like, oh, hey, like how you define North America might include this river or not include this river. Are you measuring for flow of water? Are you measuring for length? Are you measuring for maximum width? Because, hey, maybe these other rivers come into play. Also, if you count, anyway, you see what I'm saying, right? Knowing a lot about rivers would allow you to not just answer the question, but actually raise questions about the questions that show that you really do know this subject. But if you're not allowed to question the question and you're not allowed to provide an answer outside the one that's given you, wow, you're just like, again, it's intellectually disabling. Your mind is being captured and framed and controlled. You're not learning and you're not being asked to think. This is the problem that I have with multiple choice tests. Functionally, though, societies kind of have to do this, right? There's not a choice. It's not a real criticism of society. But what happens is we need a way of framing things to think about them sort of collectively, right? So we have to do something, right? We have to have some agreements. We have to have some loose, undiscussed, unreflected upon assumptions that we go through our day with. And we have to have some sense of what kinds of range of possible answers are acceptable for any kind of thing. And when you do that, which is necessary, then you can get through your day. That's great, because you can't think about everything every day from its inception. This would be impossible. It would disable the humans. However, occasionally, I think it's very liberating to do this. And when you go back and you read philosophy and you sit down with it and you go, oh, like, whoa, look at that idea. Where did this idea come from? Or this idea is crazy. Like when you hear Plato talk about love and all these guys talk about love, at some point you must think, well, come on, this is just a little crazy. And hopefully this gets you thinking about like, oh, well, how do we think about love in our society? Which is probably a little crazy, right? Like it's ill-defined, kind of radical. It's outside the norms of most civilizations throughout history. I mean, it's completely problematic if you stop and give it one moment of reflection. The problem is once you do that, then you've opened up one of the core framing structures of our society, the importance of love, specifically a romantic, erotic love, like the eros is the one we've gone for, let's just say, in a big way. This is our framing assumption. And once you start asking about the framing assumptions, man, you're in trouble. Right now, things are now you've just made trouble for yourself. So I apologize if I've made trouble for you in your thinking, but that's the beauty and power of philosophy. Another element that I think is a little commented on when you look at the Symposium, and I certainly haven't mentioned it so far, but I think it is important to frame this, is much of ancient philosophy, in fact, much philosophy up until very recently, was written by elites for elites, because to be able to read at all, of course, for most of the world history, made you a member of some sort of cultural elite. The ability to write and have the education that allowed you to access classic texts from your civilization and then to write about them. I mean, reading is one thing. Being able to write, that is a whole nother level of the elite. And so the people who were participating in philosophical discourse, dialogue, being influenced by this, were the elite of the elite. And what we lose and what we have a hard time processing is we think of philosophers as being these random stupid people on the internet or in universities who write obscure papers and argue about things that don't matter. For most of world history, they were, advisors to kings. They were courts, heads of finance. They were, they were significant members of the social and global elite within the context of their societies. And so their influence, while only, read by a handful of people, it's a handful of absolutely the right people, right? Like it's the people who make all the decisions. And that kind of powerful influence of thought, we no longer, it's like we almost don't, I think, really don't even believe in it, because we do not have elites in the way that the ancient world had elites. I mean, we certainly have people who have more money or more power or more access, but it was so concentrated and so into such a limited number of hands that it's just astonishing. And for all the problems we might have today with the concentration of wealth and things everybody talks about, this is as nothing compared to most of the ancient world, because the gap was absolute between the people in your top five and the rest, and in absolute in every way. So, some people say, "Oh, we're returning to that." I'm like, yeah, not yet. Maybe we'll get there, but so far, not so much. Having said that, but this ability of the philosophical voice of a few members of the elite, like Socrates, however outside and sort of an outsider he was, look, he's at the party. He was invited to probably one of the biggest parties of the year, which is to the winner of the Dionysian festival. And he decides to come the second day when many of the most important members of the aristocracy of Athens are present, right? So, yeah, he's a little older. He's famous for bothering people in the marketplace, but let's be clear, right? He's a personage. And so the tone of much of ancient philosophy is the elites writing to the elites. And so they have this level of freedom and self-love and in belief in themselves, because in a way they're born into this position. And I think one of the liberating things about reading ancient philosophy, besides it frees our minds to a certain degree, hopefully or potentially, because you just get this different viewpoint, right? You get this different take on the world that maybe exposes some of the assumptions that we wander around with necessarily just to get through our days, and all of a sudden like, oh, there it is. But also their attitudes even towards themselves. And I think this is something that Plato really captures, like Agathon, Aristodemus, Aristophanes, Alcibiades, like the whole crew. Clearly, I mean, if nothing else, you should have, I think, maybe noticed how much they just seem to really be enjoying themselves, right? Like, oh yeah, this is great. We're mocking each other. We're trying to seduce each other. We're doing this crazy thing. We're just this continual just sense of, oh yeah, I'm going to send up praise God, and then of love, and then the other people are going to make fun of me, which clearly Phaedrus knows this is going to happen right from the get-go. And so, but that's fine. They don't mind that. You can make fun of them because they know we're all in there together to be making fun of each other. And yeah, it's just this richer, freer sort of environment, in part because they are the aristocracy. They are the elite. But I think you do get this sensibility of outlook. This is one of the things that Plato is driving at. Like, there are a few people, and this is what comes out in the Republic, of course, with your philosopher king, there are a few people who actually elevate themselves. And there's this sort of natural aristocracy that's formed, that should be formed, of the wisest, who then should influence everybody else. You can see in the Symposium that it's not clear that this is working out. In the Republic, he's really arguing that, oh, wow, it would be nice if that worked out. Eventually he realizes this is not going to work out. But that notion of just the assumed aristocracy, the assumed value of this, is incredibly powerful. And it's one of of the influence, not just of Plato, but much of the ancient world on the contemporary world, is this idea that comes down quite powerfully, I think, that there are a select few. And if you can just get the select few right, then everything else will follow. If we can just get the few right people into the presidency or the leadership or whatever. And it's phenomenal to me how pervasive this is, because this is, again, not an Epicurean idea. This is not a Stoic idea. Maybe a little bit to Stoics because they were the elite. I mean, Stoics is sort of the philosophy of the elite, so it's implicit there a bit. But boy, Plato has this absolutely. And it's one I didn't mention last time so much, but I did want to exit on this, is that I think it's important to be very leery of this. Because there is, one, shocking little evidence this is true, and two, because it is this incredibly seductive proposition that somewhere out there, I think this is where a lot of the conspiracy theories come from, that somewhere out there are the philosopher kings, there are these few people who are running everything because they must know. There are those few people who know, and then the rest of them who don't know, and then what you're trying to do is get on the side of the people who know versus the people who don't know. And that sense of finding the truth that allows you to not elevate your soul to heaven, but elevate yourself to the position of the rightful and just ruler of society. You are the one who knows, the one who is in control. I think it's just, wow, you see it all over the place. Is it powerful? Is it seductive? And I actually think people get involved in philosophy in part because there is this seduction, this idea of, knowledge is power, knowledge will set you free. But I think what people sometimes mean is knowledge will set me up to rule over the credulous masses who I have now, which is clearly what Plato means. I think Plato has no use for the credulous masses. Let me tell you, he's not a friend of the people. So I just think it is this unsubtle, omnipresent seduction that Plato rolls out, and that we've really continued to carry throughout our society right down to today, even though we theoretically live in the Western world, at least in these democracies, and have these democratic ideals. Functionally, I still think this is a powerfully seductive notion, and that it is, I would say, potentially one of the dangers of philosophy, if you can think of it that way, is that it does try to seduce us in this Platonic worldview where, not only will you gain insight, not only will you gain wisdom, by the way, which is many philosophers and philosophies and civilizations have made that argument, it elevates you above your fellow man and makes you fit to rule and justly rule. Like, ooh, that's a whole different. See, the Taoists were actually moved away from ruling. Like, this is one thing the Tao Buddhists, of course, are saying, what are you talking about? Just let go of all that. Like, the Taoists have no part of this. Hinduism has no part about this because they're not big in the wisdom thing in Hinduism. It doesn't work the way we have it in the West, and certainly not the way Plato does. Epicureanism, again, as I keep mentioning, says leave the world behind, don't have much to do with it. That's just a fool's errand over there. Wow, but it's Platonic theory that says, no, no, no. Wisdom is the path through liberation and to basically domination and to elevate yourself above, again, the crawly, stinky masses. And then you get this really powerfully in places like Nietzsche, where I think some places where he goes the most wrong in his thinking is when he goes furthest down this Platonic path, which he, by the way, of course, being the great Greek and Latin scholar that he was, he knew Plato backwards and forwards, but verse by verse, absolutely perfectly. And so, when he speaks this stuff, it is clearly just straight from Plato. You're like, oh yeah, he's been drinking his Plato on this day, and you can just see it in his text in places where he's functionally paraphrasing Platonic paths knowingly. He's not like cheating or anything. He knows that his readers would often recognize this as well in that age of classical scholarship. So. But that, that hit of like, oh yes, this makes you a member of the elite. This raises you up. This puts you above. This makes you better. This is all that kind of language and outlook is, again, strongly Platonic. And like I said, so I feel one way to exit on this is to mention that, yeah, this is one of the dangers of philosophy, because I think it's easy to be seduced into it as like, oh, this is going to make me better than them. Right. And I'm like, oh, when people start on this line, I'm like, oh, there's Plato, right? There it is. There it is. This is the path. This is exactly, of course, what Socrates argues. Like this makes you better. And this is what Alcibiades backs up. He's better than us. Why is he better than us? He's better than us because he's done this path of bizarre erotic wisdom. It's just, this makes him better. And wow, what an interesting notion. What a powerful concept. And I do think we have this ideal still very powerfully in our society, and it influences us. And I think it speaks directly to some of the things that we often hope and feel when we go about doing philosophy. And for me, I always want to say, I think it's a bit of a trap, but yeah, your mileage may vary. So, bit of a rambly conclusion there, but some important points that I think Plato has raised. So this is what reading is to me for understanding philosophy. And when I relaunched this channel with the Patreon, what I wanted to do is try and be more, slightly more academic. Because again, I mentioned in this, I believe that I'm concerned that access to higher education is becoming increasingly challenging, and even the education you can get is becoming increasingly suspect, as it were. And as I mentioned today, I would almost certainly not have been able to go to college if I were born in the United States. If I were going of college age today, I almost certainly would not be able to go to college. So I was very fortunate to be able to have access to the kind of support and funding that was available when I did go to college. And so that kind of educational opportunity, I can't change the geopolitical higher educational structure of the United States of America or other countries, but hopefully what I can do is reach out to people like myself who may have had the opportunity and not got the education they wanted, or have not had the education at all for whatever reason. And so, so for me, these close readings, this long ponders, these careful analysis, these opportunities to take notes and to disagree and to ask questions, that is structurally what education to me really amounts to. And so when we spend our time going slowly through a text that's so influential, like the Symposium, what you're really doing is reliving what education used to be. It used to be this very slow, seemingly slow, but also very fast in some ways, depending on what you want to count as speed. Accretion of outlook and personal experience and personal ideas. I have nothing to do with what I've said, but now that you've spent so much time with the text, you have your own version of the text. It's yours. You own it. Congratulations. And you can make of it what you will. And so that is kind of what's freeing. And for me, this is a huge part of education where I do kind of agree with Plato, like the ability to free your mind, to own your own ideas, to pursue them, and to build on them is what I'm really trying to work through and for in this kind of new incarnation. And so I've also, if you're following on YouTube, Patreon, I've also launched the new History of Philosophy series, which is the same idea, right? If we go through the history of philosophy in 16 questions and you take notes, by the time you get done with that, you'll have your own version of the history of philosophy. You'll have your own ideas. You'll have your own concepts. And then you will have built up an independent outlook, your own kind of touchstones, your own concept, your own context that you can carry with you. Now your mind is free. Now you're thinking. Now you can go, which is my whole point in this. Now you can be invited to the symposium, and you can stand up and you can give your praise to Eros, or discuss the nature of love, or discuss the history of the idea of the individual, or whatever. And you're not going to agree with Aristophanes and Aristodemus and Phaedrus and Socrates, but that's not the point of the symposium. The point of the symposium is not to agree about things, it's to explore things, it's to share them, it's to be able to bring an offering. And notice, this is what they count this as. This is an offering that we're bringing. When I organize my thoughts, get my mind together, and give a speech, I'm making an offering both to the people who are present, it's a gift, and to, in this case, the gods, but theoretically to the notion of communal wisdom and knowledge and insight. And to make yourself the kind of person who can carry philosophical offerings, to make yourself overflowing, as Nietzsche would say, since we've invoked Nietzsche, to make yourself overflowing to the point where you have gifts that you can bestow, not arguments, not convictions, not correct answers, but gifts of insight and wisdom that you've built yourself. And for that reason, if for no other, I think the symposium and the Platonic outlook is so amazing, because it does create this world where it was valued for you to carry this in your mind and to be the kind of person who could sit down and say, hey, you know what we're going to do? Tonight we're going to express ourselves as an offering to each other, offering of insight, wisdom, and joy. And this will allow us to build a better, fuller understanding and appreciation of our world and of each other. And if nothing else, that vision of people gathering and making themselves great and sharing their gifts is like worth the whole trip to me. So I hope you enjoyed the symposium, and stay tuned for what's coming next, which I haven't quite decided, but it will be soon. I'll have to figure it out soon, and I'll let you know. Thank you very much.